Here is your full story, 3,000 words, clean and engaging. Margaret Calloway arrived at the building alone. She always did things alone. It was a habit she had carried since childhood, growing up watching her father build something from nothing in a city that did not always welcome quiet people with big ideas. Her father, Robert Calloway, had taught her that the loudest person in the room was rarely the most important one. He had lived by that belief for 71 years. He had built a company by it. And when he died 14 months ago, he had left everything to the one person who understood him completely. Margaret. She was 58 years old. She had silver hair that fell in soft waves past her ears, and she wore a navy blazer over a cream blouse, neat, understated, the kind of outfit that said nothing about her and everything about her comfort with herself. She carried a worn leather portfolio that had belonged to her father. Inside it were documents, notes, and observations she had been quietly collecting for the past several weeks. She pushed through the glass doors of Vantage Solutions at 8:37 in the morning and stepped into the lobby. The building was in downtown Chicago. It was tall and modern, with polished marble floors and a ceiling that stretched high enough to make people feel small. Plants lined the edges of the reception area. A young woman sat at the front desk, tapping at a keyboard without looking up. Around the lobby, a handful of employees were arriving for the day, swiping badges, sipping coffee, murmuring to one another in the easy, distracted way that people do when they believe the day will be ordinary. Margaret walked to a row of chairs near the far end of the reception desk and sat down. She opened her portfolio and began reviewing her notes. She was calm. She had been calm for a long time. The receptionist glanced over at her once, then returned to her screen. She assumed, as most people in the building would assume, that Margaret was a vendor. Or perhaps someone waiting for a family member. Certainly not someone worth paying close attention to. Margaret did not correct this assumption. She had not corrected it for weeks. His name was Derek Harmon, and he arrived at 8:47. You could hear him before you saw him. Not because he was loud exactly, but because of the way the building seemed to shift when he entered. The receptionist straightened, two employees near the elevator turned their heads, a junior staff member stepped out of the way without being asked. Derek Harmon was 44 years old, well-built, and dressed in a dark charcoal suit that had clearly been made for him specifically. He wore a watch that caught the light whenever he moved his wrist, which was often. He had been the CEO of Vantage Solutions for 6 years. Under his leadership, the company had grown its revenue, expanded into 3 new markets, and won a regional business award 2 years in a row. Derek was proud of these things. He spoke about them often. He had photographs of the award ceremonies in his office, positioned where visitors would notice them without him having to point them out. He was a man who had spent his career being told he was exceptional. And over time, as tends to happen, he had come to believe it completely. He noticed Margaret the moment he walked in. He noticed her not because he recognized her, he did not, but because she did not fit the picture he carried in his mind of who belonged in his lobby at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning. She was older. She was sitting quietly without checking a phone. She had not signed in at the front desk. She was reviewing papers as if she had every right to be there, which struck him, for reasons he could not have explained clearly, as slightly irritating. He handed his bag to his assistant, Lena Cho, who had come to meet him at the door as she did every morning. Then he changed direction and walked toward Margaret. He did not lower his voice when he reached her. This was important. He did not pull her aside or lean in discreetly. He spoke at full volume, in a lobby filling steadily with arriving employees who could hear every word. "Excuse me," he said, in the tone of a man who uses the phrase not as a question but as a warning. "Can I help you with something?" Margaret looked up. She smiled pleasantly. "Good morning. I'm just reviewing some materials." "Thank you." Derek looked at the portfolio in her hands, then at her face, then at the general space around her as if searching for something that would explain her presence. "Do you have an appointment?" "Not exactly," she said. "Not exactly," he repeated. He let the words sit for a moment, and then he smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who has decided they are dealing with a situation rather than a person. "Ma'am, this is a professional office. We have a check-in process for a reason. If you don't have an appointment..." "I understand," Margaret said. "I won't be in the way." That's not really the point. He straightened slightly. Behind him, 3 employees had slowed their walk toward the elevator. Priya Nair, a project coordinator who had worked at the company for 4 years, stood near the coffee station and went very still. Do you know what company this is? Vantage Solutions, Margaret said. Right. And we have a standard check-in process that everyone follows. Everyone. He gestured vaguely toward the front desk, then toward the door, as if presenting her with 2 options and letting her choose. If you can tell me who you're here to see, Lena can check the schedule. Otherwise, I'd suggest we call you a cab, and you can come back when you have a proper appointment. Several people in the lobby were no longer pretending not to watch. Margaret closed her portfolio gently. She looked at Derek Harmon with an expression that was remarkably difficult to read, not angry, not embarrassed, not amused, just quietly and completely present. Then she said, in a perfectly even voice, "Of course. I'll wait in the conference room. The large one, on the executive floor." She paused. "I believe I still have a key card." She reached into the front pocket of her blazer and produced a slim electronic card. She set it on her knee without showing it off, just held it there, the way someone does when they're simply locating an item, not performing. Derek laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. "The executive conference room is not a waiting area." Derek. It was Lena. She had appeared at his shoulder with the silent efficiency of someone who had learned to move quickly when the situation required it. Her face was professionally composed, but her eyes said something else entirely. She held her phone at her side with both hands. Derek turned to her with the mild impatience of a man who did not like being interrupted. "I'm in the middle of something." "I know," Lena said. "I need a moment." He excused himself with a look in Margaret's direction that was meant to communicate he would be returning shortly to resolve this. He stepped away with Lena, close enough to the reception desk that the distance felt significant but not quite far enough for true privacy. Lena turned her phone screen toward him. It was an email from the company's legal department. Flagged urgent. Sent 11 minutes ago. Derek read it once. Then he read it again. The lobby continued its ordinary morning sounds around him, keyboards, footsteps, the soft chime of the elevator arriving. But Derek Harmon had gone very still. Margaret Elaine Calloway was the only child of Robert Calloway, who had founded Vantage Solutions in 1987 with a leased office, 2 employees, and a philosophy about honest work that he had written down in a spiral notebook and referred to for the rest of his life. Robert had grown the company slowly and carefully over 4 decades. He had taken investors along the way, managed dilution thoughtfully, and through all of it had held onto his controlling stake with the quiet stubbornness of a man who trusted himself above market pressure. When Robert died, after a brief illness he had faced with the same composure he brought to everything, he left Margaret 61% of Vantage Solutions. Margaret was not a businesswoman in the conventional sense. She had spent most of her adult life in education. She had run a nonprofit literacy organization for 20 years, had served on the boards of 2 foundations, and had raised 3 children largely on her own after her husband passed. She was not inexperienced. She was, in fact, deeply experienced, just in rooms that did not have corner offices or award photographs on the walls. When her father's estate was settled and the reality of her inheritance became clear, Margaret did not rush to make decisions. She took her time. She read. She spoke with the company's existing board members. She hired an independent advisor who had no relationship with the company and no reason to tell her anything other than the truth. And then, over the course of 6 quiet weeks, she began visiting. She did not announce herself. She did not use her name. She went to the coffee shop across the street from the building and talked with employees who stopped in before work. She sat in on a public-facing client event that anyone could attend. She reviewed employee feedback reports that were technically available to her as a majority shareholder but that no one expected her to actually read. She was building a picture. What she saw was a company that was financially successful and culturally troubled. Turnover among women in leadership positions was more than double the industry average. Internal complaint records showed a pattern of concerns that had been filed, acknowledged, and quietly closed without resolution. 3 senior women had left in the past 2 years. All 3 had signed agreements that included confidentiality clauses. The lobby, that Tuesday morning, had not surprised her. It had confirmed what she already knew. Lena Cho was exceptional at her job, which meant she was also exceptional at managing the emotional temperature of situations that had begun to go wrong. She walked Derek back toward the lobby with a steadiness she did not entirely feel. Margaret was sitting exactly where they had left her, portfolio open again, reading. Derek stopped a few feet away. Something in his posture had changed, the shoulders had come down slightly, the practiced ease of his usual bearing replaced by something more careful. He looked at Margaret the way a person looks at a piece of furniture they have just realized is actually a load-bearing wall. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. "Ms.," she replied, without looking up. Then she closed the portfolio, stood, and extended her hand. "Good morning, Derek. I think we can use the conference room now." The large conference room on the executive floor had a long oval table, 12 chairs, and a window that looked out over the river. Margaret sat at the head of the table. Derek sat to her left. 2 board members had joined by video call within 40 minutes, one from London, one from New York. The company's legal representative sat at the far end of the table with a notepad he had not opened. Margaret did not raise her voice once during the 2 hours that followed. She presented what she had found, not dramatically, not with any visible satisfaction, but with the steady, organized clarity of someone who had spent a lifetime making complicated things understandable to people. She showed the turnover figures. She walked through the complaint records. She named the pattern without naming individuals. She described what she had observed that morning in the lobby, not as a personal grievance, but as a single documented example of a larger, documented problem. The board members on the video call asked questions. She answered them directly. Derek attempted, at one point, to explain that the morning's incident had been a misunderstanding, that he had simply been following standard protocol, that without any prior notice of her visit, how could anyone have known? Margaret let him finish. Then she said, very calmly, "The issue this morning is not that you didn't recognize me. I didn't expect you to. The issue is how you treated a woman sitting quietly in a lobby. The way you spoke to me was the way you speak to people you have decided are not worth your consideration. That is a choice. It is also a pattern." The room was quiet for a long moment. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Ms. Calloway, what would you like to see happen from here?" She had thought about this for a long time. She had thought about it on walks in the evening when her mind was clearest, and in the early mornings over tea, and in the weeks of observation that had led her to this table. She knew what she wanted. She had known for some time. A formal review, she said. Independent. External. Looking at hiring patterns, promotion records, and the handling of internal complaints over the past 5 years. And I would like that process to begin this week. Derek Harmon was placed on administrative leave 3 days later. The announcement inside the company was brief and offered little explanation. Outside the company, in the press, there was even less, a single short statement about a review process and a temporary leadership arrangement. He resigned 22 days after that morning in the lobby. The resignation letter, reviewed later by people who understood corporate language, said a great deal by saying very little. He cited the desire to pursue other opportunities. He wished the company well. No one who had been in the lobby that Tuesday believed it was really about other opportunities. Priya Nair was 31 years old and had spent 4 years at Vantage Solutions doing work that consistently exceeded her job description, in exchange for a salary and a title that consistently did not. She had watched the morning in the lobby with the particular silence of someone who had learned that speaking up had costs she had already paid once before. She was not called in to explain herself. She was not asked what she had witnessed. She was not made to feel, in any way, that she was in trouble. Instead, 3 weeks after that Tuesday, she received a meeting invitation from Ms. Calloway's office. The invitation said, simply, "I'd like to hear from you. 30 minutes, whenever works for you this week, *. Priya sat across from Margaret in a small meeting room with 2 chairs and a window that looked toward the elevator bank. Margaret had a notepad and a pen. She asked Priya about her work, her experience in the company, what she felt worked well and what she felt did not. She listened without interrupting. She wrote things down. Priya talked for nearly an hour. She was not the only one. Over the following weeks, Margaret met with 14 people, project managers, analysts, designers, 2 members of the facilities team. Most of them had never been in a meeting with someone at the ownership level. Most of them had things to say that they had been holding for a long time, waiting for a room where saying them felt safe. Margaret gave them that room. The new CEO of Vantage Solutions was announced 8 weeks after Derek Harmon's resignation. Her name was Sandra Okafor. She was 46, had been with the company for 9 years, and had spent the last 3 of those years leading a division that had quietly become the company's highest-performing unit by almost every measurable standard. She had been passed over for senior leadership 3 times. Each time, she had been told the timing was not right, or that they were looking for a slightly different profile, or some other careful arrangement of words that meant something she was not supposed to say out loud. The announcement of her appointment was made on a Wednesday morning in the same lobby where, 8 weeks earlier, a woman had been told she might want a cab. Sandra stood at the front of the room, not at a podium, just standing, the way people stand when they are not performing, and she thanked the staff for their work and told them she had a lot of listening still to do. She meant it. Everyone in the room could tell that she meant it. Margaret was not in the building that day. She had no interest in the ceremony of it. She was, in fact, at a breakfast meeting with her youngest daughter, who was visiting from Seattle, at a small restaurant 3 blocks away. She had done what she came to do. Some stories end with a dramatic moment, a confrontation, a speech, a scene that people replay and describe to others for years. This story does not quite work that way, which is perhaps why it is worth telling. What happened at Vantage Solutions was not a single dramatic moment. It was a series of small, steady choices made by a woman who had learned, from her father and from her own long life, that the most lasting changes are rarely the loudest ones. A man made assumptions. He acted on them publicly, without hesitation, in front of people who watched and said nothing because they had learned that watching and saying nothing was safe. A woman led him. She had not come to the building that morning to confront anyone. She had come to see. And she saw, not just Derek Harmon, but the whole of what the building had become, the silence of the lobby watchers, the pattern in the complaint records, the 3 women who had left and signed papers, the 9 years of Sandra Okafor's quiet excellence going unrewarded. She saw all of it. She changed what she could. She did it without drama, without public revenge, without a single moment designed for applause. There is a line from a letter she wrote to the staff after the transition, not a press release, not a company announcement, just a short letter that was distributed internally and read quietly at desks across 12 floors. Power does not require announcement. Dignity does not require proof. And a company is only ever as good as how it treats the person no one is watching. In the lobby of Vantage Solutions, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, no one was watching. Except Margaret. And that was enough.